All right, so let's begin. So just to briefly set the tone, the purpose of the meeting is to talk about startups and discuss what it takes to build one, how can you improve your odds of doing one, and also how we've built OctiLearn up to this point. What are the challenges we faced, and what are we doing about those? So to start off, it's important to set the tone or set the context or the stage in terms of what it takes. You probably may have heard that startups are very challenging. That's the one of the main reasons for that is that there are a lot of uncertainties. So, for example, if you have a problem that you want to work on and you come up with a solution, you're not really sure as to how effective that solution is going to be unless you take it out to a large number of users and again test it with the actual audience and see what they're saying. And many of the things in terms of how much capital you need, because when you're starting out, at times you'll think, again, just to standardize it, I'll give you an example. And it doesn't mean it's a real value, but just as an example. Let's say you think something's going to take $30,000 or 40,000 or 50,000, maybe even 20,000. The amount's not important. And you have a certain game plan in mind. Now, what will happen quite often is that you'll start working on something, you'll keep going further, you'll keep using capital. And if you're having more trouble than you had anticipated, you might just get into a position where you're worried about how much funding you have left, and you're thinking, oh, we can only go on for another 3 months, but we need 6 months to get to a certain point. That's a hard situation to be in. Then in that case, you either have to raise the funds from somewhere, or if you're unable to do that, then in the worst case scenario, you may have to shut the startup down. And according to some statistics, 90% of startups fail. That's a very staggering statistic. And it's not very surprising because there's so many reasons as to why something could happen. For example, one of the top reasons is a co-founder dispute. So generally the core team, that let's say two or three co-founders starting it out together, they fall out. So things don't go well, and that obviously rocks the ship to the point where it's not possible to recover because that's too big of a damage. Then you could run out of capital. Maybe you build something, but people aren't responding the way you thought they would. you know so and we could go on and on like this with other reasons coming into play. So that's basically why the risk factor is great. Now what that means, it doesn't mean that you have to be intimidated by it, obviously, because if you are intimidated, then you're probably not going to be able to do it. So the failure rate is high, but then there's also success, right? There are a lot of startups, and some of the common ones, for example, if you look at Airbnb or Uber, prime examples because they're just scaled to the point where everybody knows of them. But at a point, when they started out, people didn't know who they were. Facebook, for example, started from one university campus. Nobody knew who Facebook was, except for a handful of people. And then, they kept growing and kept scaling. Then, of course, today, everybody, I guess there's no one who doesn't know what Facebook is. So, you could end up on that side as well. And that's actually what makes it very exciting, because with the probability of failure, there's also the probability of unbelievable success and scale, where you get it to a point where the company is very sizable. You've got the tens of thousands of people working at the company. You could get acquired. You could go public. There's a positive side as well. That's the point. So if you want to do it, some things you'll have to keep in mind is that, for example, it takes a lot of resilience to actually build a startup. It's a roller coaster ride, and anybody who's done it, if you ask them, even if they're successful, they'll tell you that there are a lot of oscillations. There are moments where there's a lot of excitement, and you're thinking, "Oh, wow, this is great. I'm going to do something that people are responding well. We're growing at a good rate." And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks, maybe a month later, you'll again hit a challenge, and you'll be like, "Oh, what do I do about this?" The ups and downs are going to be there. So one of the key things to remember is that there is no way you will be able to avoid them. The only thing you can do is accept them. So that's it's a mindset. It's a game of mindset. And if apart from all the specifics that go into startups, what's the problem, what's the solution, how big is the market, how are you going to make money, fundamental questions that everybody will ask you about any business you're doing. The key thing is the mindset. You need to have a lot of courage, and most importantly, you need to have the courage to fail. That is extremely important. Why? Because if you are doing a project like that, you do a startup, and it doesn't work out, it's important not to let that affect you to the point where, it sort of bogs you down. Of course, it's going to be disappointing for any person because especially it's because of the effort it takes. But the point is that you can always start again. There are people who've done 3 startups, failed, did the fourth one, and then really did amazing with the fourth one. Now, as to how quickly you can do that, that there's no limit to it. But that really depends on circumstances. What are your financial circumstances? Do you have somebody to back you financially, or do you have funds in a personal capacity? Obviously, that usually is easier said than done. But what it could mean is that if you do one, let's say it doesn't work out, you can always work in a certain sector, continue moving forward. And then whenever you think the situation allows, you could go for another one. So the thing is that you cannot give up. For example, if I tell you about my own case with OctiLearn, I can tell you there were times where I actually honestly did not know how I was going to work everything out, because one of the examples I gave you, I think I ran into that as well. That what I had thought as a timeline and how long it would take, it took me longer than that. So in terms of managing the startup financially and then also working myself was was very difficult. And there have been occasions where at times I've talked to people and they, for instance, they would say, why don't you do something else? Why are you just running after one thing? You can diversify. And at that point, when you're under pressure, it's really important then for you to really believe in what you're doing. And I'm assuming you may have heard people say that as well. It is actually very important. It's not just a theoretical statement, because when you are under pressure and things are not really going in your favor, but what you're building you think has immense value and could add a lot of value to your customers, whoever those are going to be, then you know that if you keep pushing and you stick to it, a turning point will also come. So things will also turn in your favor. The wind is not always going to blow against you. And again, when you do a startup, you actually figure out what it means to be resilient, because it is hard. So number one, when you look at the myths or you look at something online and startup raising a lot of money or growing or scaling, that's only what you see as an outsider. But if you go behind the scenes, there's tons and tons of effort that has gone into it, not just from one person, but a group of people, obviously, that come together as a team. So, these are some things that you'll have to keep in mind. And I'm sure you'll have some interesting questions related to this. So you might want to keep those in mind for the end. So in terms of my journey, when I was during phases where I was really wondering how this is even going to work out, it's costing a lot, and what am I supposed to do? Luckily, what I did, I don't know where it comes from or how I have that trait, but I just giving up was actually not an option for me, and I was like, I have to do this. No matter what the cost is, I have to do it. So I just never actually entertained the idea of turning back and saying, "Oh, I don't want to do this anymore." It was stressful, but the good thing is that as we just continued to move forward, now having users from more than 40 countries, and then people saying great things. Particularly all the users that we've had, a very large majority liking what we're doing. And another really cool thing is that most of the features that they've suggested are actually those that I have already considered. So to see those students recommending or suggesting the same features that are part of the roadmap, gives me a lot of confidence, because it means that what I have in my mind is actually close to what they also want. And that's really a good sign for a startup. Yes, it's difficult to get there, and there are a lot of things along the way, but the fundamentals are in place that you know what you're building. They are going to use it, and if they are going to use it, and they're going to stick to it, that would it really makes a difference. That means you'll probably manage the other things as well, because that's the most important thing. If the user doesn't use it, it's game over. And certain things. So, for example, you have to be resilient. You must be adaptable. Why? Because things are going to change all the time. So if you have a certain plan in mind and you say, I want to build, let's say if you have a subset like that, and you say, this is my feature set, this is what I'm building. Now, at that point, when you take feedback and you evaluate based on what the audience is saying, your users and customers, you will have to make changes along the way. It's very common for you to have a certain vision in mind, but then a couple of years down the road for the solution that you're building to look different. Why? Because you would have made a lot of changes along the way. It's called a pivot. For example, you have to continuously pivot. What it means is that if you're going straight and you see the road is blocked, then you just divert yourself. Then if you're going there, you see that's also blocked. Then you say, okay, you know, think of it like a maze. Every time you run into a dead end, you have to figure out, okay, how do I get out? And it's pretty much like that. So when you're doing that, as far as you can continue doing that and doing that quickly and keep learning, you should be fine. And then, for example, you have to be very curious because when you run into challenges, if you're genuinely not entertaining them as opportunities to learn and to improve, you're not going to make it. So you really, again, you see, it comes back to mindsets. If you look at what it takes to be successful, of course, you have to be knowledgeable about what you're doing. You need to make good decisions. You're going to make bad decisions as well, but you just want to make sure that the good decisions outweigh the bad decisions, so that you're net positive. But again, fundamentally, it's a lot about being intrinsically solid, just sticking to it and really going for it and also believing in yourself. But you have to make sure you're not delusional. You see, this is why startups are tricky. For instance, let's say you're building something, you think it's great, but the audience is not really responding positively. And let's suppose some people are telling you that, this is not really working out well. You need to reconsider what you're doing. But you're like, no, no, I'm really sure. I'm certain it's going to work. I'm going to work. It's going to work. In that case, what you have to do now, try to be as objective as possible. So if you're subjective, meaning you bring your own bias into play, you can land into a lot of trouble. And that's where you're more likely to be delusional. What you need to do is strictly go with the evidence. If the audience for whom you're building is giving you negative feedback or they're not liking what you're building, don't take it personally. It's just the product that they're evaluating. They're not evaluating you. So you need to get back and think, okay, this is what they're saying. Why do they not like it? And then on whatever suggestions they give you, you have to really think, okay, how can we cater to these suggestions or these gaps that they've identified? If you do that, over time, you'll get closer and closer to their preferences. So it's important not to, be stuck with your own ideas. You have to let the evidence speak for itself. And then, of course, if you're true to the mission in terms of you're solving a real, genuine problem that a lot of people are facing, and you're willing to continuously adapt, over time you will obviously get to the point where people are responding well. As to how far you'll get, of course, that again depends on a lot of things. So that only time can tell. And basically, again, the key point is you have to stick to it. And there are going to be a lot of challenges. So if you want to do a startup now or in the future, make sure you keep in mind that it's a hard journey. It takes a lot of time. It can be glamorous in terms of a positive outcome, but it takes a long time. That's not what you're supposed to be thinking of in your head. In your head, you just need to be working towards something and trying to get closer and closer to a better situation so that it continues to escalate. And if you're doing that, you should be okay. But it's important not to give up. Again, you have to keep that in mind because you're definitely going to run into situations where you'll think this is not going to work. And it does create doubt in your mind. And to be honest, there have been occasions where, the situation has been so difficult for a couple of reasons where I've been thinking, how am I going to put all of this together and do it? But then what I was doing was just trying to get one step further, another step further. I thought, okay, if I've taken maybe 50 steps, I take another 50. There will be a breakthrough somewhere because that's how it works. The more doors you knock on, the more chances are that, luck will sort of shift sides as well. And, when they say people that, oh, they got lucky or he got lucky, generally, they don't get lucky by doing nothing. They come across luck because one, they're prepared for it, and number two is that they continuously try. So after a lot of attempts, of course, there are a couple that are going to go in your favor. And talking about all of this stuff, then let's just get a little more specific. These are just traits, personalities, realities that's telling you about in terms of startup. And one thing, I think perhaps the most important in terms of a starting point. Now, the first thing that you generally look at is a problem, right? You want to solve a problem. And who are you solving the problem for? How bad is it, in the sense that whatever they're doing right now, how much do they struggle in terms of solving it? And again, to give an example, when I started out with OctiLearn, the background was that I was working at schools. I taught physics, and then heading the Department of Physics and STEM, helping students prepare for competitions, helping them apply to colleges in the US, how to write strong essays, how to navigate the whole college journey, and student mentorship as well, specifically in terms of personal development, how to develop communication skills, how to become better writers and speakers. So it was a very 360-degree experience that I had, in the education sector. Now, what I was noticing was that when I was in A level myself, there was a certain way of preparing for the Cambridge exams. And then when I was teaching, which started in 2015, and then even now, I still teach a few students. I was noticing that they're still doing the same things that we used to do. And it's been, what, 2008 and now about 16 years. So I still feel baffled about that, in terms of that the efficiency has not really gone up. Now, if you look at the corporate side, there's a lot of tech that goes into a lot of corporate sectors. But when you look at education, it's still pretty manual. For example, when you look at testing, everybody takes the same test, or when they're preparing for it, they attempt questions manually. When you think of technology, I was thinking, okay, would it not be a lot better if the questions just adapt to every single student, so that they're automatically targeting each person's strengths and weaknesses? They'll probably get to the finish line way quicker. So a student doing manual work, if it takes them 6 months to be ready, the other one could be ready in less than half the time. So how do we bring that into the teaching and learning cycle to basically accomplish two things without going into specific? One is, how do we make the learning process more efficient? And then number two, how do we help every student achieve more success than they would have if we had not existed? So that's how, I came up with the problem. I wanted to do an ecosystem approach, where I thought we will take learning assessments, which is testing, and then do analytics on that. And then in the fourth step, we bring in the AI tutor to help students, overcome their learning gaps. Something that's available 24/7 and can adapt to you instantly, really fills in that gap in the traditional model, where there's no such thing. So there's no substitute for that if you look at a traditional school, which all of them will fall in, they'll fall in that bracket. So that's how we came up with this thing. If you look at some other companies, for example, they do testing. The reason why I wanted to take an ecosystem approach is because I thought, if I only do testing, let's say OctiLearn was only testing students, then you'd have to go to a different platform to learn, right? And then you'd come to us to do the testing. And then what about improving? You'd have to yet again go to some other thing. So I thought we'll not be able to create significant impact to really make a big difference on outcomes or grades that students are achieving and how quickly they're doing that, unless we control the entire process, which means that all the stages that are there in the learning cycle, we should address all of those, so that everything comes together as a single whole. And that's basically why we call it the learning ecosystem. And then if you look at other companies, what they're doing, a key differentiator is that I was always interested in really bringing technology into the picture by, again, working on the efficiency with which students are learning. So, if you do just the video lessons, or you have classes just the way they have on YouTube, those are digitized versions of the same traditional model. I was interested in changing that model, because if you change the underlying model, you can apply it to any curriculum in the world, whether it's IGCSE, A Level, SAT, or anything else. And that's exactly what we want to do. Once we do IGCSE, we'll do A Level, and then we'll probably map it onto the SAT, because the underlying model is the same. So of course, you build content and you create content to map it to a new curriculum and what the requirements are. But other than that, the underlying model will remain the same. So, that's the problem, that's the solution. When I looked again at the market, I thought, okay, people are not really focusing on personalized and adaptive learning. For example, when they do video lessons, they say you can learn at your own pace. That is a very basic definition of personalized learning. It's been there for more than a decade. watch videos, pause it whenever you want to, and watch as many videos as you want to in a single session. Am I audible? Okay, yeah, looks like there's a bit of a glitch. Yep, so let me recall what I was saying. Yeah, in terms of personalized and adaptive learning. So watching a video, yes, gives you control, but it's a very basic definition of personalization. Where I'm going with this is we want the whole system to adapt to the student. You know, observe what the student's strengths are, what are the weaknesses, what's the frequency with which the student is using the platform, how much time it is spending, and then of course take all of that data basically and personalize uh, the entire platform to help them achieve their goals so that our platform adapts to what you need. And then if we have, let's say, 50,000 students, it would be doing something different for all 50,000. And another key thing is that a model like this that is genuinely data driven, it tends to get better as more and more students come on board. That is a huge difference between OctiLearn and any other company that's doing following the traditional model is that as more and more students come on board, the load on the system increases. If you think of a school, for example, more students means what? We need to have more teachers. Well, you have more teachers, but the underlying problems are still there. There's no easy way to get academic support. There's no personalized feedback, right? People don't understand their strengths and weaknesses categorically. If you and nobody's tracking them. It takes a lot of work. For example, if you take any topic, let's say we're talking about physics, we take the topic of motion and ask you to track it. I've never seen a student actually going into the down to the level of the concept. Which are my conceptual strengths and which are my conceptual weaknesses? Of course, if you ask the student, they will be able to explain it, but they're not tracking it. And, they're not addressing it in a systematic manner. So our idea is to do all of that, the heavy lifting on behalf of the student so that when the student spends time, they're like, oh, wow, I've made great strides and I'm doing it at a very good pace so that they don't have to worry about all of that. And, that's why it's really exciting. And I guess maybe that's why I thought that I should keep going if at times, when it got really tough, I didn't want to turn back because I really believe there's immense scope for this. So, okay, well, so we've talked about the problem, the solution, the market. If you're coming up with a startup, some things about the market you'll have to see is how big is it? Now, that's not a very simple question. There's a top-bottom market sizing approach or bottoms up. Now, top-bottom is like you look at how big the market is. Let's say you say it's a $1 billion industry. And then, well, if we have, let's say 5% of it, would be worth $50 million. That reasoning will never work with any investor because it doesn't work like that. And simply saying 5%, 2%, 1% of a market, well, if you do it, of course, you'll be in a good position. But the point is, how are you going to go from zero customers to 10 to 100 to 1,000 and then to 10,000? So that's why going bottoms up is much better. Yes, you have to look at how many people you can target. So let's say you're looking at how big the market is. You want to see what can you charge them on a monthly basis, quarterly or annually, whatever the case is. And then how many people are there who would pay for it in total? If you were to capture 100% of the market, let's say in Pakistan, what would your market size look like? Then you also have to keep in mind that as far as subscriptions go, software subscriptions, you have a B2C and a B2B model. There are very different challenges in each one. Now, again, in our case, to give you some context, B2B means that we operate and we partner with schools and push it out. B2C means we go out direct to the student. Now, I decided to go out or start with B2C for a couple of main reasons. One is that it allows us to interact with the students very closely and there's no third party involved. So, we can really engage them in the whole cycle. like you people have seen with the internship, trying to really see what you think, what all the other users think, what are they saying, how can we improve this? So with the school, for example, they expect a refined product. So they want the whole thing to be ready so that, let's say, once we implement, they're ready to go and they start using it as soon as we implement. And that's very hard to do because, of course, it requires a lot of capital. So you need a lot of money, you'll need a lot of resources and a lot of time to build something that's that refined. And then even once you have built it, the school's decision cycle is not very quick. They'll take a few months to think about it and to get back to you. So while they're thinking and while you're waiting for the first school to be onboarded, you're pretty much sort of still building and tinkering without interacting with the audience. But on the B2C side, you see, we've spoken to so many users, we've taken feedback from so many, we've acquired so many, and we're continuously growing it. So that allows us to continuously refine the product and then expand it as well to include additional features. And once we include those, then of course, we would be open to speaking to schools and then implementing it there, because one of the benefits of that is that, of course, because the school has, let's say if the school has 50 campuses, then in that case, it's more predictable revenue, basically. B2B, when you're going out to businesses, it is just more predictable revenue. And obviously, you're not going to charge them like $20 or $30 a month, right? Any product you're building, you will really have to think, do you want to go for businesses or do you want to go for the individual customer? If you want to go for the individual customer, the customer acquisition is very challenging. Simple example, let's say you have 1,000 people who pay for the month of August. Next month in September, depending on how many you lose, you might have 500 who pay, maybe even 300 or 700. We don't know, but it's going to fluctuate quite a bit. So the predictability is in there. You know, that doesn't mean B2C is better or B2B better. You have to, again, think about what you're doing and think about your own context and circumstances. So don't go with generic advice. And, with that, if you have all of these things in place, you have a great problem you're working at, you think a lot of people struggle with it. And before you even start working on something, by the way, you have to validate whether that problem is real. In our case, the exact problem that we're tackling is underachievement. People thinking, oh, I am good enough to get an A star, but I end up with a B or I end up with an A. And that happens to a very, very large number of students, because the system is not as effective as it needs to be. So that's basically what we're doing in simple words. We want to uplift their achievement. And in terms of the mission statement that we have, it says that we empower each student to achieve success. We say success, not academic success, because my vision of empowering students basically means is that educating them and giving them resources to be so well informed that they can make better decisions for their entire lives, not just when they're at school. For example, with the internship program or with this whole talk, what the idea is, for me to share my experiences with all of you, how I did this, how you could do it, so that you're in a better position to actually do one if you're interested. Because when I started out with a startup, all of it came from self-learning because, my father, for example, had run a business all his life. He had never worked for somebody else. And, same goes for his brother. But as far as I'm concerned, I have not run a business before. So you have to learn a lot of things. And then when you look at traditional businesses, let's say running a restaurant, the variables are much less. Uncertainty is way, way lower. Startups are way more challenging. But then again, if you're willing to learn, you can actually acquire information very quickly. And as time goes on, you continuously keep getting better because you're talking to people who are doing it. If you want to do a startup, one of the best ways to learn really fast is to, let's say, you read a couple books. Zero to One by Peter Thiel is a great book that you can read, or The Founder's Dilemma is another one. Let's say you've read a few books. Y Combinator, by the way, has a startup school on YouTube. It's a great content. Perhaps the most popular accelerator in the world that takes in startups, provides funding, resources, network, helps build a team, and help them scale. Once you've seen all of that, you'll have a lot of insight, and then you go speak to people who've done it. And then again, if you have a problem, try to identify how serious the problem is. Are people going to pay for it? That's one of the biggest questions. And then are people going to use it? Just as important of a question. You see, I'm sure you've already realized while talking, we are jumping a bit here and there. It's because, the problem, the solution, market. Do you have a good team? Does the team know what they're doing? Do you have expertise in the domain in which you're building? Do you have your basics covered in terms of the product, in terms of marketing, in terms of the tech part that you're doing? All of those things need to come together. And, most of it needs to be right for the entire venture to be successful. And again, hence why the uncertainty is high and, success rate is low. There's just a lot of things that could go wrong, and you have to prevent those from happening. Finally, we'll just talk a little bit about fundraising. So when you're starting out at the first stage, it's called bootstrapping, for example, where you have your own money coming in, or you could also think of it as it's called a friends and family round, where if you have certain relatives, your friends, anybody else who is willing to back you, and you take some investment from them and you say, I want to start working on something. Now, a couple of things I can tell you is that it's not a good idea generally to ask for investment when there's nothing to show. You could, it really depends on the circumstances, because in the early stages, to be honest, people are betting on the founder or the team, or, co-founders if there's more than one founder. And it's not really about what they're building. So if you know somebody, let's say you have a relative who thinks that you're very capable, you're a very hardworking person, and you've got this thirst to learn and to achieve something on your own, then they're basically betting on those characteristics, and they think you'll make it. Regardless of what idea you're pursuing, they believe in you. So they're like, yeah, we'll go for it. Give it a shot and see what happens. That's okay if you can manage the situation. But what is actually far better, and will give you more leverage as well, is that, when you've identified a problem, go ahead and do as much work as you can on the ground level, which means speak to people who are facing that problem, speak to your customers, ask them questions, and you'll have to think how to frame those questions to sort of make out what they're actually telling you. And from their responses, try to evaluate the situation. And if you feel that the problem is not actually as big or as serious as you thought, simply switch to a new problem, right? So you keep going until you zone in on a problem that you think, oh, wow, a lot of people are struggling with this. And it's such a hassle for them that they are going to look for a solution that's better. And then if you come up with a solution that's much better than the existing one, you see, then you're getting closer and closer to starting something that really has potential to create large scale impact. And with startups, you should always go for a problem that's scalable. For example, again, in terms of OctiLearn, I was never interested, or you can say North Star was never to build a startup that was specific to Pakistan. Yes, we're launching initially here. We're starting out from Pakistan. We want to be very active here. But the idea was to go beyond, across borders. And then I thought, okay, let me go for the Cambridge curriculums because they're offered in 140 countries. So that means with the same product, we could go out to all of those places. So the aspect of scalability is very real, and it's immense. And that's what was exciting for me. I guess because when I was about around in my teenage years, late teenage, or around 18, 20, somewhere there, I used to have this thing where I didn't know how I would do it, but I always used to think that it would be really exciting to be on the global stage, meaning competing at the global level, not just a local level. It's just a thought I used to get. I had no idea how I was going to do that, but it's just something that would really, used to fire me up. And now with the startup, when I look back, the interesting part is that I think, oh wow, this is the gateway with which I can do that, because I can see what will take you to the point where it becomes a global thing and it's not just restricted to a single place. So with that being said, when you with the fundraising, first stage, if you validated the problem, for now, if you're talking about the solution, don't go out building an app because you're excited to build it. There are ways, because there's low code and no code tools, so many of those. Just put something together that ideally solve what you're aiming to solve, and get many, many people to come on and use it. Let's say you have done something and you can tell somebody that, hey, you know what? I have got 1,000 people using this. because it really helps them to do X. Now, at that stage, if you're speaking to somebody to give you an investment, that is a very good, a strong starting point. You understand the problem, you've got a solution that they want to use, they are using it, you've got a good number of people using it. See, that's where you can get people to come in. So, that's, you should think about it incrementally. And otherwise, in terms of, asking people for advice or how to run the startup, um, you have to remember that as far as running the startup goes, you should only ask people for advice on the startup, mostly who have done one themselves. For example, a lot of people who don't understand how startups work, in their mind, they might be giving you good advice, but many times that will not be good advice because they just don't understand how it operates. They can give you good generic advice in terms of, oh, you should stay at it, keep working hard, and stuff like that, which I'm sure you guys already know. You hear it all day long. But in terms of evaluating the context, the circumstance, and deciding what's the best course of action, somebody who has not done a startup is going to be very unlikely for them to be able to offer very useful contextual advice. So again, you have to be a good critical thinker. For example, let's say you ask person A what you're supposed to do in a certain situation. You're struggling to move forward. And person A suggests, whatever, some steps that you should take. Now, if you're unsure about the merit of that advice, you can go to another person and don't tell them that person A, made that recommendation. Just frame it as your own. Say, I'm thinking I should do X or Y. What do you think about it? You know, and then you can see what they say. So you're basically looking for corroborating evidence, meaning multiple people saying the same thing. If that's the case, then probably you have to go deeper and you have to think that, oh, maybe they are right. And the most important thing again is to be honest to yourself. What that means is that you have to be willing to accept that, yeah, when I made this decision or that decision, those were not the right decisions or not the best ones. Because it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to make those. Don't try to shy away from it. Because unless you acknowledge within your own self that, yeah, these are mistakes that made, you're never going to correct them and the startup is never going to work. It can only work if you're willing to accept all the things that have gone wrong over a period of time and you're willing to correct those as well. Because if you are willing to do that, then you just continuously do that as quickly as you can. And over time, you're going to get towards a better position. And so basically that, sums up, hopefully gives you a good insight into what it takes and, what it means. And finally, before I end, so yeah, fundraising with, bootstrapping and friends and family coming in. With fundraising, you should also look into, there's a lot of self-learning that's going to come into this. Anybody who is not great at self-learning, in my opinion, should not do a startup. You're just asking for trouble in that case. There's going to be so much to learn that you will always have to continue learning. You'll be forced to do that. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. So now people talk about valuations. So one of the fundamental things, for example, you should understand at very early stages where startups are trying to validate the market and trying to prove that there's a market for this, and people are going to pay for it, they're willing to pay for it, all of those things that show that it's got potential to generate revenue and be profitable in the future. Um, at the early stages, nobody knows what the value is going to be. So there's something known as a SAFE. It's called a simple agreement for future equity. So it means today, some investor will give you some amount of money, but that money will convert into equity, meaning shares in your startup at a future date. And what is that future date? That the conversion from investment to equity will happen when a priced round takes place, which means that down the road, when you take an investment at a certain valuation, where the valuation is being determined, the first time that it's going to be set, that is when that stake converts into equity. Until then, it doesn't convert, but you obviously have an agreement that at that point, your money will convert into equity. And for example, there's a valuation cap, usually that's used for a safe. For example, if you take in some investment and the valuation cap is $5 million, $3 million, what that means is that the, when the next round takes place, Just to give an example, let's say next round is a $10 million valuation. Now, because the person who invested using the safe came in with a valuation cap of 5 million, that means when you are taking in the next round of investment at a valuation of $10 million, that previous investor, his money will convert into shares at a valuation of $5 million, not 10. Why? Because we set a cap for that investor at 5 million. That means it doesn't matter how far above you go that number in the next round, his money will still convert at that cap that you've decided. And that's why it's there. Because the idea is to incentivize the investor who comes in early. Whoever comes in the earliest stands to gain the most. Because as you grow, the valuations are higher, and then your growth from there is not going to be as substantial. Somebody who comes in on day one versus somebody who comes in when you're already making revenue, obviously, there's going to be difference in terms of the reward that they'll get. So there's an incentive for them to come in early. Okay, so well, that should pretty much, summarize most of, things you need to know for a good starting point. And of course, there's a lot to learn. Other than that, we've talked about the problem, solution, market, fundraise, evaluating what you're building, and continuously iterating to get to a suitable point. So I think that should be it from my side. And if you have any questions, which hopefully you do, you can please send them in the chat, and we can take those before we end. And you'll have to type those in. Okay, so others who have questions, please continue sending them. So then, I can just go ahead, read those and respond to them continuously. So Hamza is saying, with education or other meaningful startups, you can find a problem and solve that problem. How would you do that with, for example, a clothing brand or jewelry brand or any other brand that isn't really solving a problem? Right. So I think I see what you mean. Well, in terms of a problem, there is always going to be an underlying thing that they're addressing. If you're talking about a clothing brand, for example, we still see a lot of new clothing brands coming in, right? All the time. Now, you could compete on, you could offer better quality, you could offer better price. But now, when you look at something as a clothing startup, you can do a business, but in terms of doing genuinely a startup, startups tend to have, again, a high scalability component. Now, if you're a clothing brand, for all the hardware, all the equipment that you need to manufacture all those clothes, and then for you to grow from one country to another, it's actually it's a good business, but in terms of a high growth startup, it's going to be very difficult to scale rapidly with something like that. But you could still, do it. You're saying in terms of solving the problem. So let's say you observe clothing brands in the market, and you'll have a certain insight. Perhaps you could say, well, all the brands I have seen, for us or for people to get good quality clothes, they have to pay more than X to get it. But because the margins are there, or because we were able to cut costs, or we could cut costs if we take a different route in terms of getting to the end product, we would be able to break into the market and acquire a lot of customers. For example, you could say, oh, we could sell it for less than X and still offer the same quality. Now, hypothetically speaking, if you can do that, then that does put you in a good position to take off. But it's a good point you mentioned. With if you're not really solving a problem, then again, that startup essence is not going to be there. How do or why do startups scale? Because they're genuinely solving a problem. So you have to differentiate between a small to medium business and a startup. Not every business is a startup. So that's the important thing. You could comfortably build a clothing brand and perhaps be very profitable as well. But if you're not really solving a problem, the aspect of scaling and, in let's say 5, 10 years, really growing to a very large company is probably not going to happen. It might just take 40, 50 years to do that. And which is why most of the time you see a lot of the startups have a software component, because that, the scalability is there. But you could, again, keep in mind that not every small business is a startup. So those sound more appropriate to me as small to medium businesses. They could, of course, grow over time, but not really as startups. If you have a store that sells jewelry, I mean, you're just one of 50,000 other people doing that. So again, you're right. You're not really solving the problem. If you really want to grow, you must solve a problem that is actually faced by a lot of people. And if you look at any startup, you look at Airbnb, you look at Uber, you look at all the others that have come into the market of late, you look at Facebook, social media, you look at WhatsApp, any of these startups that you've heard of, if you go in, they all solved a problem. None of them just started doing, something that they thought was a good business and something that was being done by many other people. Roma is saying, how much money did you invest in OctiLearn and how did you form a team? Well, certain questions cannot be answered, that directly. So I think it's more appropriate not for me not to share the number. It is, I don't know. Of course, it's going to be significant. I can just tell you it wasn't $20,000 or $30,000. It was more than that. So, and how did you form a team? Well, so I have Richard on the team. For example, he's been there since day one. He has been an attorney in the US for more than 4 decades. He's advised 2,500 startups. He's an attorney. He's a lawyer, basically, and also has an MBA from Wharton. So, he's been on the board of several companies. So, a very experienced person like that. I actually met him on Upwork. I had put out some work for legal help that I needed because we were registering in the US. So, we started talking and we used to have great conversation in terms of what I was doing, just generally chatting and getting to know each other. So I thought he'd be a great addition because he has tremendous experience. I clearly don't have as much experience as he has, so it's always useful to have that side as well, where you can balance the sort of mission and passion-driven thing with somebody who has ground experience. So, he came in, and then Jessica is actually also based in the US. I reached out to her on LinkedIn. We started engaging, showed her what I was doing. She was really excited. She thought it's a great idea. So, then I was like, okay, well, why don't you sort of get linked to the startup on the academic side? And, she said, yeah, that's great. I'd love to do that. So and that's been a couple years now as well. And similarly, when you reach out, basically the way I built the team, generally speaking, was by reaching out to people, connecting with them. If you want to form a team with people you don't know really well, you have to be careful. By careful, I mean you should go slowly because you don't want to rush things. Once you sign an agreement, bring them on, and you keep them there, you might run into issues. So you want to converge towards that point, which means that you should always start working with restrictions in place, meaning use the first few months, first several months as testing ground to see at least whether you could go the distance with that person. Because important key members or important members of the team, they have to be with you when times are rough. So that's something you need to keep in mind is that whoever you're working with, whoever the core team members are they going to stick around when things are not going well? Because that's going to be the most important thing. Everybody's going to stick around once you made it. But when you are in the process of getting to that point, people tend to want to, just say that, oh, we're done, we're leaving. So you want to prevent that from happening. And by the way, there's something, when you give a certain member some equity in the startup, you can look this up. There's a cliff period and then there's a vesting schedule. The cliff period basically means that, let's say I take Hamza on the startup as a member and he's going to get certain equity. Now, the cliff period is 1 year. That would mean that for the first year, he's not going to get any equity in the startup. And then when you say the vesting schedule is spread over 5 years, and you want to give that person 5% of shares. whatever the role is. Then, and you set a 5-year schedule. You could say that at the end of each year, that person will get 1%. At the end of 2 years, they will have 2%. At the end of 5 years, they'll have 5%. So, for example, if after 1 year they're leaving, they'd only be the rightful owner of 1%, and you'll protect the remaining 4%. So you don't dish out equity like that on day one. You set up a schedule that incentivizes the person to stay with the startup in the longer run. Do OctiLearn have competitors right now? Or do you have some other company you look up to? Well, competitors, yeah, definitely, because you see, in terms of what we're building is different. And if you look at the other education companies, you will probably notice that. But yes, we certainly have competitors, because anybody who is offering educational services to students enrolled in IGCSE and A Level, are competing in the same market. Now, if we're saying that students come on board, it's a more effective solution for them, then there are other people with their own reasons, with their own models, with their own products. They're also doing the same thing. So we definitely do have products. In terms of whether I look up to any company, I don't think I look up to one of the competitors that we have. But yeah, I think in terms of design, I'm a huge fan of how Apple does design. If you look at their website and the user interface they have, and generally iOS, I think it's really smooth. And I just like how they design things. The design aspect, or the aesthetic that they go with is really resonates with me. So in terms of design and marketing, I think it's great, because Apple customers are just sort of kind of really sticky, so they tend not to use anything else and just stick with Apple. And I think one thing that is common is that we have an ecosystem approach. Apple does the same thing, actually. So, for example, where you look at the Mac, you look at the iPhone, you look at the iPad, all of those are part of an ecosystem. They want you to stay within the ecosystem, right? And then everything is very seamlessly connected to the other part. That's in the academic context, that's exactly what we're doing. For example, when you look at the notes, flashcard testing, AI tutor, simulation, all of that, which is something I explained about earlier as to why we're doing the ecosystem approach, so that we can control the whole process. Yasser is saying, how to get the right people on the team. Is there any recruitment strategy you learned through the experience? Oh, that's a great question, and requires a little bit of thought. It's not easy answering those right off the bat. I think you should go with basically look at the values that they have, and that's easier said than done. Now, for instance, when you're evaluating somebody, one of the things I think that's a great idea is to not do any technical talk and ask them about domain expertise. Talk to them about their life experiences, you know, how they got to the stage where they're at. What are some of the most difficult moments in life they faced? How did they address those? How were they able to come out of that? What do they think about conflicts? For instance, in terms of if they have a conflict with another person, what do they think is the best approach in terms of solving it? You could ask questions like, what are some non-negotiable things for them? You see, these are open-ended questions, but they're very fundamental. And by asking questions of this nature, what you're trying to do is to look beyond the responses, try to make out what the person actually thinks and what values drive that person. Because unless there's a match in values, for example, in terms of what you're trying to achieve, what do you think is good practice and what do you think is good conduct with the others, and how you think a company should build a culture, what should that culture look like? Is this person going to be a good fit with that? Basically, is he going to enhance all of those aspects, or would he maybe not grow? Because you see, the problem is, if fundamentally based on values, if that person is not a very strong fit, then even if they have the skill set, it's not going to work out. So that's actually one of the key things I've learned, and I would recommend that domain expertise comes in later. I mean, of course, you're going to evaluate that, and you're free to do that as well. But before you even do that, you need to evaluate fundamentals, because at the end of the day, it's just a people to people thing, right? You're working with 5, 10, 20, 30 other people. do all the people come together as a unit? If they do, they will be able to solve a lot of problems because that team spirit kicks in, kind of like a sport. When all the team members are on the same page, they have the same objective. They're not playing for themselves; they're playing for the team. It's a much stronger unit. You can beat a lot of other teams if your team comes together for a unified goal. But if people are playing for themselves, it's not going to work. So, those are things that are actually hard to evaluate. People have different philosophies. One thing I think I would uh, strongly recommend is try to develop your own vision in life. And if you're asking me, of course, I'm sharing my thoughts with you, but you don't have to take my ideas as is. And the best things and the most special things will usually happen when you have originality. So listen to people who've done it, try to read books, watch videos. There's so many of them on YouTube with very experienced, very accomplished people talking about all of this. And then once you've accumulated all of that information, you have to convert that into knowledge. And I think one of the things I've learned in life is that I never used to understand this. I used to have a lot of information, but didn't have a lot of knowledge. What is the difference? Is that, because I like to read books, listen to people in terms of, just people, accomplished people speaking about entrepreneurship, speaking about success, speaking about academics and whatnot. But unless you can implement those things in your life, it's not knowledge. And you'll see that. That is absolutely true. If you know a lot of things, yes, you have information, but that information is not of any use unless or except that you might be able to have a good impression on people who don't know too much because they're thinking, oh wow, this guy knows so much. Knowing a lot is not going to get you too far. But if you're able to implement all of that stuff, that is where basically you'll start changing the game. Everyone is going to stick around once you made it. Yeah, Laiba, that's true. I mean, yeah, we all know that. And when things are hard, you see, you have to be your biggest believer. That's why I think, to be honest, I've learned more about life by doing the startup. I don't think I would have learned so much about it unless I had done one because it's very holistic and teaches you some really solid lessons. And when you look at friendships or any kind of relationship for that matter, it's the same thing. Is that when things are really rocky, it's you need to have a certain amount of faith, and you have to keep going. And then of course, that's how things change. One of the things I've noticed is that I think there seems to be a system God has put in nature. Is that if you're going for a really big goal, obviously the chances of failure are going to be higher. But the amount of difficulty that you have to face is also going to be very steep. The bigger the goal is, the steeper is going to be the mountain that you have to climb. And but if you are able to climb it beyond a certain point, then it seems like nature starts rewarding people for having stuck around, for so long despite things going against them. So it's an interesting game like that. How did you build a community for OctiLearn? Um, Hamza, so the International Olympiad on Astronomy and Astrophysics, I select the national team for Pakistan. That was one of the things. For example, when we were registering, I brought everybody into the community and added them, there so that they could ask each other for help. And I could respond to all the questions the participants had. It was just easier to have them in one place. And then all the users that we've acquired who are joining the app, we asked them if they would like to join our community. And if they say they would like to join it, we add them. If not, then we obviously cannot add them without permission. But as basically people keep discovering us, and as they, in fact, if you go back, as they kept signing up and coming on board, we started adding them onto the community. Because I think I'm really keen to build an international community, where again we have IGCSE and A Level students coming together from different places. That will be quite interesting because they can share a lot about their experiences. There's going to be immense diversity in what they bring, and you cannot do that without diversity. For example, when I was an undergrad in the US, that's I think perhaps one of the strongest memories in the sense that because there's students from all over the world, there's a different level of energy that you have because so many different perspectives coexisting simultaneously. is really a special thing. Hazel is saying, what made you start OctiLearn? Hazel, I'll post the video on YouTube. So if you just watch the recording we started earlier, I did respond to that, so I'll have to skip. How can I, as a student, find and connect with like-minded people and network with people in a way that'll benefit me? Um, One of the first things you should do is make sure your LinkedIn profile is complete and it's up to date. Try to spend a few minutes a day interacting and following people in certain spaces. Now, if you're interested in a startup, for example, or you're seeing like-minded, connect with them. And instead of just connecting, send a personalized invite and just introduce yourself briefly. Hi, and so doing this and that. And I'd like to connect with you and learn from your experiences. Or if you want to change that message, you can change it. But start doing that, connect with people, follow them, and start commenting on posts. Now, when you're commenting, don't just do it for the sake of it. Only comment on posts that are of interest to you. When you start doing that, others will see it. Then they land on your profile. Of course, they could also start adding you. You'll start getting more and more people in your network. And if you keep doing that, you can mark today's date is the 10th of August and look at it on December 10th, for example. You'll see the difference yourself. You'll have a lot of people you'd have access to, and feel free to ask people for help. If they say no, it doesn't matter. It's okay. You can just shoot people a message and say, I want to talk about so and so. Could you please, would it be possible for you to spare 10 or 15 minutes to get on a call? But don't do that to everybody. And unless you know exactly what to ask, if you haven't done your homework, if you haven't learned as much as you could, then don't reach out to people for help because it's not easy for them to get on calls. For example, if 20 people ask me if I can get on a call with them and they want to speak for 20 minutes, that's 400 minutes. That's about 7 hours, right? So it's impossible. So you be mindful of their time, but start connecting with them like that. And when you're engaging, they will be willing to help you. So that's a really effective way. Well, that's online, could be anywhere in the world. And then apart from that, when you go to university, you probably know people who are like-minded. So it would be a good idea to connect with them as well. But social media, particularly, if you're there on LinkedIn, even Twitter is great. But I think as far as people in Pakistan go, Twitter is not that popular. But if you're looking at global connections, like I've connected with a lot of people who have never met in real life and have spoken to them many times as well. I think Live is saying, I think teams sometimes do put the other down, so we should be a little picky about it. My university people do find it offending, but it reminds me how even gold medalists Arsenal Dean said he didn't play cricket because his father said that his team leaves all the work on him. He should do something individually because he had potential, and here he is winning. Um, well, that's a really interesting point. So yeah, so she's saying, having teams and teams bog you down. Well, Laiba, as far as startups go, that is one of the beasts that you'll have to fight because if you don't have a team, you don't have a startup. You're not going to be able to scale. By the way, if you look at traditional companies, that are owned by one or two or three people, family-owned businesses, they never scale globally. They never scale to the point that a startup, manages to get to. Why? Because people are not incentivized like that. The startup has a very simple model of incentivizing all key members of the team. Somebody's leading the tech department, somebody's leading marketing, somebody's leading operations, somebody's leading product, the CEO is leading the company. All of these other people have, certain equity, shareholding in the startup. And that is why you see they're all aligned, meaning they all know that if we make the company grow, we are going to get rewarded for it as well. Aside from the compensation or monthly wages that they're paid, they have shareholding in the company. So, and that's why all the forces come together to help it grow. Because if you want to scale, if you're talking about, let's say, $1 billion company, how can one person or a one-man show do that? If that happens, it'll probably take your entire lifetime. And I'm not interested if it happens when I'm 80 years old. Some people say That is still good, but I don't know the way I think about it. I'm like, oh, that's a little too late, isn't it? So you have to bring together people who can do that, and that is again one of the tests you will face as a founder. You have to evaluate the people, and you have to see how to avoid those pitfalls. But yeah, Arshid Nadeem had to throw a javelin, right? That is something one person can do. But building a startup, you're not going to be able to do that on your own. It's just not possible. You will not see a single startup in the world that has done that. It's always a team. So you will have to face that. But I think it's fine. Yeah, of course it's fine. Absolutely, it is. You have to be. In fact, you are supposed to be picky about it. That is a given. If you're not picky about it, then there's a lot more chance that you'll actually land in trouble. You have to be very picky about it, not just picky, in fact. You have to really think hard and try to basically evaluate the person as deeply as you can. And then that's how you go on to pick members. And the key members of the team, will play a make or break role. Not everybody is in that position. For example, let's say you're a team of 20 and somebody's working as a graphic designer. Now, of course, you want to retain that person, but if the designer leaves, that doesn't mean that the company is going to die. But if you have the top level people you're looking at who are just running the show, who are bringing the departments together and moving the company forward, there's a lot more at stake. Okay, it seems like those were the questions. Any other questions? So I think it's about almost 25 past 4. So we can shoot to end by 30, like half past 4. So 5 minutes to go. And if you don't have questions, then perhaps you can send messages, did you have a good time listening to what we talked about? Was it worth your time? And was it, for example, was it different compared to what you thought it was going to be like? That's an interesting question I have for all of you in terms of when we were starting out. What did you think? And now that we're ending, was it better than what you thought? Was it worse than what you thought? Whatever the case is. Yeah, Hazel, that's great. I'm glad to know that. Yes, that is pretty much the idea of being motivational. You designed the OctiLearn website. Who did the development work? I remember you saying you have a product development team. Is it Ishal? Ishal? Laiba Ishal has nothing to do with product development. She's not a team member. She's an intern. Yeah, I got the website design, but somebody else did the UI UX work. I didn't do that myself, but I just think about, for example, that circle that shows on the website rotating. I basically collaborated with the UI UX designer. So, in terms of thinking what it should look like and how should we put it out. Who did the development work? We have a team, so in-house team members working on development. Yeah, so I'm just saying you got some important points cleared. Yeah, that's great. Oh, I saw someone on Discord with that name saying they're not learn. Yeah, that's Ishal. Ishal is heading the community building domain, but she's an intern. He's actually a student, undergrad student like you. So she's not in product development. And we have some UI UX work that we want to do. So I will post a message. And I was actually interested in seeing who could help with that because there's some changes or updates we want to make. For example, we're just almost done with the notes tracking feature, and the dashboard is going to be out soon as well. So in those kind of changes, if somebody can work, we'll take them on. Okay, it's great to see that all of you found it helpful. Thanks for joining. So we're going to end it here, and I'll also post it online. If you ever want to listen to it again, you're welcome to do that. And if you have other questions, you can ask in the community, or when we meet next week, for a catch up with all the interns, you could do that at that time as well. I got to know a lot more then I didn't know already. I actually look up to you. So it's cool to see you work so hard, be patient. Oh, that's really sweet of you, Liva. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to help. Um, I think as closing remarks, I'll tell you that the internship program, it's meant to be a two-way street where obviously you people have been doing some really great work. You've added immense value, and I actually I am reading things that people have said. And in a few days, I would have read every single document that all of you have submitted. So, and that's going to come into consideration as well. So, it's not theoretical. It was always supposed to be practical. And you've probably seen it, that the ideas will be implemented. For instance, the tracking feature that we're now working on was suggested by an intern. That was the June intern. And now in July, there are again quite a few suggestions that I think are great and we want to implement. But of course, we'll do that as quickly as we can. But being initiating the internship program, I really wanted a key part of this. That's why you've probably seen I've been interacting with all of you quite a lot. Was for me to tell you everything I could tell you about my own experiences, mistakes I've made, things I've done well, and how you can be positioned better. Because when I was in undergrad or when I was at school, I didn't have any such experience of somebody giving me this kind of exposure, to be honest. But I was fortunate that I was able to go for undergrad. Purdue is a great place, really well known for engineering, great environment, so got to learn a lot. So then, I thought, okay, now that I've gone and done all of that, and now I'm doing this, let me share all of it with you guys and hope that you're in a good position to do something on your own. And maybe one day we'll be seeing your startup. I'll be flexing hard to be one of the interns of OctiLearn. Yeah, that would be great. And we will talk about how we can continue collaborating, by the way. So when the internship is about to end next week, we'll get, I think, about Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll get on a call with all the interns and we'll talk about people who are interested in staying in touch or they want to continue working with us, how we can do that. And one of the things you should keep in mind is that the way I structure it, or even the ambassador program, I'll tell you how that works, is that the workload, I keep it very light intentionally. Like the ambassadors would work, I believe, about 2 hours, 3 hours a week. And if they have any exams coming up, or if they have certain commitments where they feel they will have to step aside for a few weeks, I always allow them to do that because the goal is not to overburden them. And by no means are we exploiting anybody. So for students, because I don't want them to compromise on things that they're doing, whether that's university or any other work that they're doing. So the idea is to let them be part of OctiLearn and without affecting the other things they're doing so that, they can actually acquire more skills. It will go way too far. Yes, Nabiha, we'll definitely do that. So looking forward to it. And I'm actually really excited to, take this out. And once we do the public launch, get more people to come on, make more noise and make ourselves felt. It should be a great time. I think it's about time. I mean, I hope we're close. Looks like we are, but it's been a long journey. Yeah, Libby, you can definitely do that. Okay, so this is it then. We'll end right here. Thank you.